Hey guys, this is the first video I'm doing for guns. I just wanted to quickly talk about building this PCC, which technically is not a PCC, but thanks to the internet, I'll call it that. I'm also going to talk about the Bushnell mini red dot that I have on here, and then I'll talk about the 80% kits. So what I really wanted to drive home about these, ARs are scary. This one's cleared out, so safe, clear. This one is built for 9mm, which is pistol. I actually have the pistol brace on here. This is the SBA 3. So this is legally a pistol. That's also why we have chosen the angled foregrip for Magpul. So there's a lot of little stipulations in the laws, things like that, that if you're planning on building something, whether it's your first AR or you want to try building an AR pistol, doesn't matter what caliber, make sure that you're keeping in mind those little laws. So there's little stuff out there like I can build this with, this has a, I think 8.5-inch barrel. I can't put a buttstock on this, but I can put a pistol brace, which looks like a buttstock. Still technically a pistol because it's designed for my arm to go through the brace, go onto the pistol grip, and I can shoot it with one hand. If I put a buttstock on here, it's considered an SBR. So that takes the tax stamp that you have to pay to the ATF, and I think it's around $300 right now. And that says, hey, I can have a short-barreled rifle. Same thing too, I'm not allowed to put a vertical foregrip. You cannot do that on a pistol, that's illegal. You can't have a short barrel, buttstock, vertical foregrip, all that stuff without the tax stamp. And you definitely can't do a fuel filter, suppressor, whatever people want to call it, that they think they're skimping by. I'm pretty sure the government knows those exist. So basically for this build, the reason I built this wasn't to be cool or John Wick or anything like that. I like shooting, I like going to the range. Obviously I'm a gun guy because I'm making a gun video. 9mm is a hell of a lot cheaper to shoot than 5.56 or 308. So this little system right here, I think the entire parts kit except for the lower cost me around $450, $460. This lower I got from in town. It's already serialized and everything. Bought it from a gun store for $60. And I still think I overpaid for that. I think it's worth around 40. Thank you, COVID. So what we're looking at here is just basically a small pistol caliber pistol. So the good thing about these systems is though with ARs, if you guys aren't privy to it, if you're new to the AR world, all I got to do to make this a 5.56, 300 blackout, whatever, is change out the upper receiver. So I think I was finding them on 22 mods for all. You can get a 300 blackout for like $330, and that's just the upper receiver, the bolt carrier, the barrel, everything. So this is pretty good for changing calibers. Now, obviously, you need to keep things separate. So I'll show you guys. I've actually got it on me. The magazine is a PMag. So this is made for AR-15. So 5.56, 223, whatever you want to call it. So what we're looking at is I put a Indo mag inside. It was like $30, and now it fits 9mm. It's that simple. This is a very, I like to call them the Lego of the gun world. These are very, very adaptable weapon systems. So the big difference with this, with building a 9mm, this is probably one of the easier builds you can do from home. I've already built the 308, and I've already got a 5.56, so I just wanted to build something else. This guy right here doesn't have a gas system. This is a blowback. So it's just like shooting a pistol. So when you go to put on the barrel, everybody's worried about, well, how many foot-pounds do I need, right? Or I have to get my gas system lined up with my barrel nut. There's all these little intricacies in the AR world. They don't exist on the 9mm. It's just not a thing. So you get your armorer's wrench, you get your torque wrench, you set it to about 33 foot-pounds, you crank it down to 33 foot-pounds, and then you put the handguard on. Just that simple. Like I said, when you go up to like 5.56, 300 blackout, 6.5 Grendel, that's where you actually have like a gas key on the barrel and you have the tube going back, you have to line it up. So you'll see similarities here, but it's just the AR platform. It's very modular. So the other things that I wanted to point out on this thing, you have just a basic little Amazon pistol flashlight on the side. It does its job. Then I've got the Bushnell up top. That's the other thing I wanted to talk about. So this Bushnell, the thing I don't like, let me go ahead and take off the QD. The lowest brightness setting is still pretty bright. Let me show you guys this real quick. Get it lined up on camera. Oh, come on now. There it is. So you can see on the camera, that's pretty decently bright, and that's on 1. So let's go ahead and flip it up to 11. This is the brightest setting. Oh, there it is. That's a nice bloom right there. You can see it on the lightest parts of the wall. So that's the biggest issue, and why that matters, if you're not big into red dots, you've never really used them. I know a lot of people that go hunting with iron sights or scopes or whatever. You can actually see the red dot out the other side of the reticle. You can see it out the other lens, and it'll be like a bloom. So it kind of gives away your position. The other thing about it too is it's blinding. So typically how you want to shoot with a red dot is the lowest visible light setting on the target, because that makes you focus on your actual aim rather than the red dot itself. And you can see a clearer picture of your target. So if I see a bunch of red bloom, I can't see what I'm shooting at, right? So that's just basic marksmanship fundamentals right there. So this thing, I'll let you guys know whenever I actually test it. So let's go ahead and move on to the 80% kits. That is actually probably gonna be my favorite. It's gonna be the Easy Jig. This is the one that I got when I was completing SDI, doing my AR-10 build. It's pretty well thought out, to be completely honest. I kind of underappreciated it when I was doing the build, but the next jig I'm going to show you, this is the one I got from 22 Mods for All. So I had talked about previously when I was starting my AR9 build about possibly doing my 80% and doing that from scratch, milling everything out and then moving on with the build, but I scratched that idea after I started with this jig. This thing cost me $65 on 22 Mods for All. Never could find a name brand on it, but it essentially had all the pieces that I would need for a 80% jig, so I just went ahead and sent it. In retrospect, this guy over here cost about 90 bucks, so not much more. You can get an actual respectable jig, and I'll show you guys why in a second. The first ever 80% I did was actually a P80. It was this guy right here. It's going to be a Glock 19. Had some issues with that, but I figured out later why. So some of these are manufactured very specifically, and the jigs don't always line up with what they need to line up with. So that's my forewarning there. So I'll start off first with the Easy Jig, and I'm going to show you guys the side by side with these two so we can knock out the ARs, and then I'll move over to the pistols. So first and foremost, this is the beautiful part. You get a router plate. So this thing comes in super handy and makes sure that you can get a nice even depth, 1, and then 2, you can get nice smooth walls like on the inside of the lower. This is broken down into separate sections for the different pockets that you either have to drill or mill, and they'll tell you on there like top and bottom, which may seem stupid because you're like, oh, I can figure this out myself. Like obviously it's shaped this way for a reason or whatever. But honestly, they have the little features here like a drill depth gauge, right? So that tells you you may not want to, when you're milling, start at the deepest depth because it's going to tear up your milling bit pretty quick, that end mill. So they have the depths right there. They have it on both pieces actually. So you have a main and you have a rear pocket. Same thing here. This is the initial block where you're drilling out. You start with a lot bigger holes in this one than the other jig, but it tells you rear and main so you know where you can tape off. Same thing too, you got a basic spacer here. Everything's really hardy aluminum. And then here you have the sidewalls. They make it almost impossible to mess up because this matches up with your mag well. So once you line those up and you get it clamped in properly, these pins will fit into place on your receiver. Granted, this is for AR-10, so it's a little bit bigger. Inside, they have little things as well, like here's this collar for your drill bit. So you can mark your depth on those depth gauges, and then you can move the collar down to keep it locked in place. Of course, you want to check it after you do a hole or two just to make sure you're still on your mark. They give you the end mill bit. This is the nice thing about this bit. Granted, you can buy these yourself, but a lot of people wouldn't think about it initially. So this one here has a longer shank that's smooth. And the reason they do that is whenever you have this jig set up, it's actually going to be pretty high off from where you need to start milling. So you're going to set your depth with your router. You'll measure it out with those plates. And this smooth shank is basically going to ride on the inside of the wall, so you can't mill out your actual jig. You're not going to tear up your jig when you start moving down, which you'll run into with other jigs. So that was a nice little feature as well. I really liked this jig. So on to this guy. Let's talk about this nightmare. So this Uh, I don't know. It's not really a jig, I guess. It's something trying to be a jig. Very basic. I didn't even finish it, as you guys can see. You can see all the drill holes there. Um, they give you several top plates, kind of like this other one, but you can see how thin those top plates are when you look at it. Um, really easy to tear up. So it's not like I was trying to either. I showed you guys, I have a full shop here. I've got like a drill press, I got my grinder, I've got routers, I've got everything in here I need to do an 80%. Uh, somehow it still caught my drill. I don't really know what went on there. You can see some holes down in the bottom. That's with the depth set. It was actually like hard set. I used wrenches to set it and make sure it was actually tightened in. Um, Still went through somehow. So I've heard that's a very common thing with this specific rig that I got. And funny enough, I went back online to check it out to see if I could find the actual webpage, and turns out they don't sell them anymore. So it's crazy. So you don't have to worry about buying one of these by accident or something. So the other thing too, um, typically on a jig, whenever you go to make the side holes for like your selector, you make the holes for your trigger and hammer pins. They would have them on both sides. This one only has them on one side, which is pretty bad juju when you're doing an 80%. The reason being is you don't want to drill straight down, because if you do this with like a hand drill, which I don't recommend, you have a very good chance of just having that slight degree off, and you're going to come out the wrong place on the other side. So it's a really smart move for jigs to have them on both sides. So when you look at this other jig, you've got the holes here. They're already basically pre-cut for you. Same thing too. They're already cut here. So you can basically hit each side. You can come hit all three holes, flip it over, hit all three holes again. This one's kind of, you're going through all the way whether you want to or not. Other than that, what they want you to do on this guy, they wanted, instead of the big holes and then jumping back and forth with your mill end and kind of hitting the metal and knocking it out as you go in a zigzag, they had you Swiss cheese this entire thing. Let me see if I can grab that. I probably actually threw it away because I hate this jig. The plate that was sitting on top was just a ton of holes. I don't even remember how many. You can see a basis here of what it was supposed to look like. Now the problem is they don't give you a router plate, so the next step, whenever you get everything drilled and you get the depth set, you're supposed to come back with a hand file and knock out the rest of the metal, which is extremely arduous. They also don't even finish. You can't really hit those back holes because they don't actually connect whenever you're drilling through. You're supposed to just file through by hand, which is terrible. AR is all about being up to spec on the internals. It makes everything fit properly. So this guy right here, don't cheap out on the jig. Just don't do it. Get something nicer, and normally you can get a good lower and the jig for pretty cheap. This is not worth saving $20. It's just not. So I keep this as like a learning tool. So the last jig I'm going to talk about, and I'll cut this video, is the P80, which, again, I don't hate, but I also don't love it. It looks pretty cool, and it's got some desirable features on the actual grip module itself, like the undercut here. So a lot of people want to get their hand up higher. It's also got the higher beaver tail right here. A lot of people that buy Glocks actually have that done aftermarket. Like they'll take it to a gunsmith and have that stuff like hammered out with like a Dremel. So instead of doing that, you could just buy a P80 that already has all the things. Now, that being said, it also comes with inherent problems because you have a plastic jig. So my first attempt, and this was my first attempt, my other one's working. It's completely fine. I love the thing. This one, I actually broke my first bit and wasn't really pressing through with the drill or anything like that. Kind of put it into the jig, started it up, and then as soon as it cleared the first hole, I think, yeah, you can actually see it was this hole right here. As soon as it cleared that hole, it kind of like tweaked a little bit and jumped, and the drill bit kind of like bounced and came back in an awkward angle and just broke off. So it actually caused damage to the inside. Yeah, you can see how that pin right here is crooked. I keep these as reminders. So drill bit jumped, came out and hit the side, so it messed up that hole. So I went ahead and finished it off just to try it. The other issue that I had, and this turns out it's a common issue whenever you get these specifically, this rear hole right here, this M3 hole, this is what you use to hold in that rear rail section. So once you drill these out and you take some sandpaper or file and knock out this middle channel for the guide rod spring, this is a weapon. Like, this is considered a firearm. So what happens is you drill this rear hole with the jig, and the metal piece for the rail is actually pre-drilled. You go ahead and slide that in and the holes do not line up. So whatever they're using to calculate where this jig has a hole and where the rail section has a hole just don't match. There's not really a lot you can do about it. It happened that way with both of my P80s that I built. So this first one and the second one is actually operational. The fix that we found to that, however crappy this sounds, was to put it back into the jig, put the rail section in. We saw it wasn't lining up, so we put it in the drill press and drilled through the metal to make it match, which is not recommended, but we didn't really take that much metal out. It was barely in it at all. It was just enough to make the pin slide through. Still a pretty tight fit. So that's the only things I'd say watch out on this one is you get cheap bits with it, so I would buy extra bits. They're not that expensive. And then that rear pin hole right here. That's really what you're going to run into. All right, so if you guys have any questions about building a P80 or an 80% lower, like the pros and cons of building like a PCC or a AR pistol, I know there's a lot of misinformation out there, or I don't know, frankly, a lot of people don't want to like take the time to look it up because they're like, why is that's not applicable to me? I'm never going to need that, when realistically it could be meeting what you need as a rifle or a pistol platform. Get with me, shoot me a comment, a message, something like that. Feel free. I love talking about guns, so I will answer your questions, or I'll direct you to somewhere if you want to know more about different calibers, barrel lengths, whatever. I'll make sure I get that information for you. Thank you guys for watching.